Good evening. Welcome to the Wednesday, June 12th, 2019 meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission. I'd like to begin with approval of the minutes from May 22nd. Are there any additions, corrections, deletions to the minutes that anybody has?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Joel. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I'll abstain. I didn't even read them. It wasn't here. Sorry. I'll just be honest.
Shame, Dave. Good for you for honesty. I read them, but I wasn't here, but I figured
Right.
reading them is okay.
Well, I should have read them, yeah.
Okay. All right. Item 2 is public comment. It's an opportunity for members of the public to speak about matters that aren't before us tonight or on the agenda or currently pending before the Planning and Zoning Commission. Is there anybody who wishes to speak? Okay. Moving on to item 3, approval of reasoned statement of relevant criterion standards for beginning, I guess Mike will present on preliminary subdivision plat of the 41,000 plus parcel in Indian Hills, and then the planned unit development reasoned statement of criteria. So,
yeah, this is just in regards to what we conducted a public hearing on last time. This was the Bloom development on Indian Hills Drive, and there was a subdivision plat, and they were required to go through a plan unit development because they were proposing smaller lot sizes, private streets, and different setbacks than what's normally allowed underneath that zone. So we've got the preliminary plat RCS that should be first in your packet, and then the PUD RCS should be second in your packet, and they're fairly similar, but you can tell by the footer at the bottom which one's which.
okay, are there any comments on this?
I'm happy with it.
Okay.
If you're happy, I'm happy. Because I know you looked it over good.
Okay. I think that, okay.
Do we need two separate motions, one for each of the one for
I think we do,
the
yeah.
plat and then one for the PUD?
So beginning with a motion to approve our relevant criterion standards for the subdivision plat. Is there a motion?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you, Rob. And do I hear a motion for approval of the relevant criterion standards for the planned unit development?
So move.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Second.
Thank you, Victoria. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. All right. Now we move on to a public hearing, ordinance amending educational services within the Central Business District, and Mike will present.
Evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. So before you tonight, we have a public hearing, and this is the ordinance we've been working on for the last month and a half. This is amending Title IV, Chapter 3. This is the Land Use Table Amendment, which initially started out as educational services that was under the council direction for us to take a look at and make the correct adjustments. So it all started during zoning code update that was approved by City Council, and this was really just the culmination of a couple years of work to put together the land use table within the zoning code, converted a lot of the narrative format into table format, and that was approved on council May 21st, 2018. And there were some questions at that time from council members about the allowance of educational institutions, so it'd be colleges and universities within the Central Business District. And then on August 20th of last year, the council provided direction to staff to develop a survey directed towards the community and property owners, as well as businesses operating in the Central Business District. That was prepared, contained questions designed to gauge the perceptions of the community and property owners and businesses operating in central business in regards to current public and private universities and colleges in central business, and then additional or expanded private public universities and college in central business. So then the survey was developed and sent out in the fall of 2018 to the cohorts there, the property and business owners, as well as the random sample of the community, similar to our citizen survey that gets sent out every year to a random sample of the community. So the results were reviewed and discussed at the City Council meeting April 1st of this year, and then the Council directed the Commission to prepare an ordinance which would prohibit additional or expanded universities and colleges in the Central Business District. So as you're aware, colleges and universities are under educational services within the NIACS hierarchy, and they're category 611. And then April 10th of this year, the Commission reviewed the Council's direction as well as other uses contained within educational services sector. And the Commission recommended excluding elementary and secondary schools from the downtown Central Business District, along with universities and colleges as well. And then May 8th of this year, the Commission reviewed draft ordinance as well as other uses which staff has encountered challenges with in the past year. And that brings us to the table amendment that's before you tonight. And I wanted to point out one slight modification that wasn't present at the last time we talked. We've been working with PCEI on a project that they were looking at a daycare on their property, and we had looked up where they had classified under the NIACS classification system. And really, there wasn't a NIACS, I guess it'd be under businesses, professional, political, social advocacy, grant making, and similar organizations. It'd be under that category. And so if you're aware of where they're located on the end of Rodeo Drive, they're in a few different zones, but it's primarily ag forest is where they're at. They originally got a conditional use permit or a special use permit about 15 years ago. And at the time, there was a determination made that they were more of an educational institution, which really didn't fit at the time. We were a little unclear how they made that reach at that time. That may have been the most similar use to what they were. But in our review of the NIACS classification, they would fall under, that would be the most suiting classification for them, would be under, more a conservation advocacy group. And so in order to rectify that little situation there with their use, we'd like to add conditional uses under ag forest, and at the same time think about farm ranch under the same pretense, and think about adding conditional use for them in that zoning designation as well. And so that's really the only change that we've proposed since you've seen this last time. And this was the educational services amendment, so we had broken it out into elementary, secondary schools, colleges, universities, and professional schools, and then all other schools and instruction. And so you can see across the board, elementary and secondary, we've got most of the residential zones where it's a conditional use permit. That doesn't change from what it is now, residential office, neighborhood business, and that would be the Commission's recommendation. It was previously not allowed in RTO, that's Alturas Technology Park, but the Commission recommended taking it out as a conditional use for central business. And then the rest of the commercial zones would be a conditional use. Colleges, universities, and professional schools, not allowed in most residential zones until you get to R4. There's a lot of R4 around the core of Greek Row on campus, and so that's why it's in the R4. And then you have RO and neighborhood business, and then it would be excluded from RTO and then central business as well. And then it'd be a conditional use permit all the way across. I guess you can't really see, but there's a permitted use, so that's university zone. So obviously it'd be permitted in the university zone. And then all other schools of instruction, so this covers all the karate instruction, yoga instruction, a lot of those uses. Not allowed in residential. RO and B would be a conditionally permitted use. RTO, there's some exclusions there. That's why there's a footnote. And then it'd be a conditional use in central business, general business. Permitted in motor business. Industrial, UMC is a conditional use permit, and then permitted by right in university zone. Then the next use that we would propose in adjusting would be healthcare services. So this is a small doctor's office, could be a chiropractic office, limited to 2,000 square feet in size. Underneath the previous code, we had professional offices covered those medical facilities that were ambulatory. And now that we've broken it out in the NIAX classification, that's one of the uses that didn't get included within the R4 zone. And so we'd like to add that back into what it was previously included. Still, the limit is 2,000 square feet in size, just to keep it at a neighborhood scale. And self-storage facilities, this was previously allowed just by right in the motor business zone. With the NIAX amendment, we put it as a conditional use permit. I'd like to put it back as a permitted use. I think the concern at the time was that some of these self-storage facilities were going to take up prime retail frontage, and that just hasn't been the case. They've been located in areas off the main highway corridor and off the main commercial areas, and so we don't really see that as an issue that we, once deliberated a little bit on internally, and we'd like to shift that back to just permitted instead of conditionally permitted. And then off-street parking areas. Well, let me go back a little bit here. We've got commercial and industrial machinery and equipment and repair and maintenance. Previously, that was just not allowed in motor business. We have some of those uses, St. John Hardware. That's currently an industrial, so there's not really an issue there. But we do have like Pape Machinery and some of the other farm implement equipment repair and sales yards that currently operate in the motor business zone. And they have some component where they do repair there. And so we would like to add that as a conditionally permitted use underneath the motor business zone. Then we had the issue with off-street parking areas. We'd like to add off-street parking areas, so we define that where we previously didn't before. So that's in the definition section for off-street parking areas. We were running into the issue before of parking lots and garages, which really just means pay to park parking lots, commercially permitted parking lots. And there was a little bit of an issue there. And so we would, strike all these as permitted accessory uses. We'd add the off-street parking areas category. It'd be a permitted accessory use there. We had quite a bit of discussion about the R4 zone, and I think we just had it permitted before, whereas you'd have a use in another zone that could go to the R4 zone and build a parking lot. And we thought that might be a little bit of an issue, and so we put it as permitted accessory and then a conditional use permit for parking lots that weren't accessory to a use that met the distance criteria of the R4 zone. And then RO and B are both permitted. RTO is permitted accessory, so you can't just create a parking lot. It has to be for a specific use within the RTO zone. Central business, we talked about that as well. We don't think we want just like standalone parking lots unless they're open to the public. And so we would like that just to be permitted accessory uses, so accessory to just a use that's within the central business zone. If there's any parking lot that's going to be constructed, we'd like it to be a parking lot and garage that's more of a pay to park, and that's why it's a permitted use. Then general business, motor business, it would just be permitted uses for either types of parking lots, as well as industrial and urban mixed commercial, as well as university. So with that, staff's recommendation is to conduct a public hearing, and upon consideration of testimony presented, recommend approval of the proposed ordinance to City Council. And I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Do any commissioners have any questions? So could you go back one slide? I missed the pay to park. Where are we with that? And I know you want it to be a permitted use, but could you clarify what you just said about a minute ago? I missed the train on it somehow.
Well, the parking lots and garages are really the pay to park parking lots.
Okay.
And
okay, so
within central business, that would mean that you can have a permitted accessory use for off-street parking areas, and so that would be a parking area that's within, I think we allow 500 feet for most uses, or if it's on the part of the same lot or the lot next door, those are all permitted accessory parking lots. If you were in one portion of central business and you wanted to have a designated parking lot, say a half mile across in central business, you wouldn't be able to do that. It would have to be open to the public, and it'd have to be a pay to
I get it
park
now.
parking
Yeah,
lot.
thank you.
And so that's why it's permitted accessory,
Okay.
and the pay to park one is permitted. So-
Okay, I got it, thank you, yeah. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mike. We'll
Yeah.
open the public hearing. Is there anybody who wishes to speak about this amendment? Please state your name and address, and,
I've done this once or twice before.
yeah, you have, but you still have to state your name.
David Hall, I know the routine. David Hall, 1334 Wallen Road, Moscow. I was concerned that there was essentially no discussion on the effects of these changes of the off-street parking areas, the parking lots and garages. I had a note about the discussion of maybe having conditional use for R4. I see that's been changed since the packet I looked at, but there was discussion on that. I was wondering if there was any input or been run by the Transportation Commission. They're looking at parking issues as part of their transportation, and it just seemed like the parking garage stuff was suddenly stuck in at the last minute at the last meeting, and here we are without any real input or discussion that I've seen of what the effects might be on the parking issue that's such a big issue in town. Thank you.
Thank you. David? Mike, do you have a response to that, or?
Well, I think we had quite a bit of discussion the last couple meetings on this, and I wouldn't believe that it's a Transportation Commission issue. It's a land use issue, and I think it's appropriate to move forward, and the council will certainly, discuss that at their public hearing for this amendment. But this was primarily the educational institution amendment, and then there was, we expanded it because there were a number of uses that we had challenges with over the last year, and this was one of them with the off-street parking areas, and we just wanted to clarify that. And really, it relates to the urban renewal project on the corner of 6th and Jackson that we're, looking at some type of satellite parking area that was going to be greater than 500 feet, and it was going to be in a different zoning district. And I think the Urban Renewal Agency Board and the council were wanting to have more parking than what was required within the district. And so that would be one of the prohibitions that we saw, was this issue with the code right now for the parking areas, as well as the discussion in the downtown district of having maybe a off-site satellite parking area for residents that just store their cars. And whereas, a lot of them have the green permits and they'll store them in the Jackson Street lot, and those are taking up spaces that are taking away from patrons of those downtown businesses that may just want to come for an hour and then leave, but they can't find a parking space. And so that just kind of sets the stage to that ongoing discussion about parking in the downtown area as well as the urban renewal district, and just trying to clarify some things so we don't have it run into an issue when they want to move forward with those projects. So that's really what we're doing here.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything to add or ask? Okay, are there any other comments from the audience? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and have internal discussion. Does anybody have any comments? Bob?
Mike has done a great job of leading us through this, and I think we took advantage of the fact that rather than just focusing on the educational institutes, it was an opportunity to look at the broad thing. I think Mike's done a terrific job. I think we've talked about this a lot, and we were all pretty much of a single mind on it. So I think, from my perspective, we're ready to proceed.
Other comments? I
agree.
I missed the last meeting, but up until that point, I would thoroughly agree with you. And I imagine it was discussed even, again, last time, so. Okay, do I entertain a motion to approve the ordinance amending educational services within the central business district?
I suppose the motion would be to send it to council with a,
To recommend it, yeah, right.
Recommend approval of the proposed
Right.
ordinance to city
Right.
council.
Okay, you're right, that would be, and is there a second? You second, or Scott seconds, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, yeah. So,
I think-
Joel, you made the motion. No, you didn't make the,
Dennis did.
Dennis did, sorry, you clarified it, and Dennis, apologies, okay. So, so did you get that in? That, yeah, thank you for asking that. Okay. So we don't, so the recommendation is going forward to council, and that's where we are. So item 5 is accessory dwelling unit review. And Mike's going to present on that. Thanks, the water.
Well, I just wanted to take the time, I mean, it's been 4 or 5 years since we approved the ordinance that allowed accessory dwelling units within town. And I think it's always good to go back and see how it's working and see if there's any modifications that we need to make or, different direction. And I think that, and I also just wanted to review how many we've had permitted and how well it's working. And just kind of go back through the history of what we did and what the requirements were and the design standards. So it was approved April 6, 2015. We did allow it in all residential zones. And so they must meet the minimum lot size to be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit. So these are small mother-in-law type apartments that are just on single-family zones, or just on single-family lots, excuse me.
so clarification on that the lot, which presumably already has a house, is the one that has to meet the size requirements?
Yeah, yep,
So,
exactly.
It's not the ADU specifically that has to meet any area requirement.
Yeah, the ADU still has to meet a certain square footage. It's 600 square feet or
Right.
40% of the floor area of the main structure, whichever's less. So if you have a really small house, then that would be probably less than 600 square feet is what you'd be entitled to. But this is one, usually in all zones, even if you're even if you don't meet the minimum lot size, you're still eligible for a single-family dwelling. But within the ADU ordinance, we restricted ADUs to just being allowed on single-family lots that meet the minimum lot size requirement. We didn't carry that over to minimum lot width. So even if it does meet the minimum lot size but doesn't meet the minimum lot width, they're still eligible for an ADU. But vice versa, if it meets the minimum lot width but doesn't meet the minimum lot size, then they're ineligible for an ADU on that property. And so that's really been, the thing that we've seen as the biggest prohibiting factor, and we'll kind of get to the reasons why that's been a little bit of an issue over the last 4 years. But we did attach some development standards to those, so it's the 600 square feet or 40% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, and so that's what the ADUs are restricted to. They're limited to just 2 occupants within the ADU. They're required to have the owner either living in the main dwelling or the ADU on the property. And that's to prevent, for instance, like a rental company coming in and just creating ADUs and then renting both the units out and having an issue there. And then off-street parking, we required 1 off-street parking space to be added to the property. every single-family dwelling requires 2 off-street parking spaces, so presumably there'd be 3 off-street parking spaces if you had a single-family home and an ADU on a piece of property.
Mike?
Yeah.
Could you, I wasn't on the commission at the time, although I followed it in the audience, but could you clarify this 40% gross floor area principal dwelling part? I remember the 600 square feet.
So it's just to control the scale of the ADU. So if you have, let's say, a gross floor area of the principal dwelling is just 1,000 square feet, 40% of that is going to be 400 square feet. And so I guess I left off the end of that, which says 600 square feet or 40% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, whichever's less.
That's what I needed.
So, yeah, and so in that case, since 400 square feet is less than 600, then that's what they would be eligible for, not the 600. And so it's really just intended to control the scale of the ADU compared to the main house that's on the lot. So we've had eight.
So why do you even have the 600 square foot in there?
That's just to limit the overall size of it. And so, I mean, really the intention is that.
Okay, so it can't be bigger than 600.
It can't be bigger.
Regardless of the
Yeah,
house.
it can't,
Okay.
that's the cap, is pretty much 600.
Because otherwise it'd
Yeah.
be 40% of
Yeah.
a 7,000 square foot house
I
could be
gotcha.
a very large ADU,
Yeah.
for example.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that was the kind of the give and take that we fought with during, that we toyed around with when we were looking at these regulations. And, most places restrict the size just because they're allowed in most residential zones. And there's a perception that, if you're in a single-family zone, you want to protect your property values, and you don't want it to become a multifamily zone or a duplex zone. And that was, one of the give or takes that we were working with, was that, you want to restrict the size so they don't get too big and take away from the existing
Yeah.
character of neighborhoods.
Okay.
So 8 of them have been permitted since we adopted the regulations. And I just have some examples of, what we typically see as far as, or what we've typically seen as far as ADUs. This is one that's in an area southwest of town, close to University Heights. I think Victoria, Conestoga area, but really there's an existing house and they just did an addition onto the west side. There's a garage underneath this. And they did an addition, and this enters up from the garage, and it's just a small, studio apartment, 1 bedroom with a little kitchenette here and a bathroom, and this one actually connects to the main house. This is the view from the outside, so they ended up just adding on. So it can be attached or detached. Some people have detached garages where they have them, but they just did an addition to add on there. And this is just Google Street View. This is actually a shot of, we caught it when they were constructing this addition, so they were just adding that on. The second bay for the garage, as well as the livable space up there for the ADU above that. This is another one. This is detached. This is actually in an existing older neighborhood just north of Fort Russell. So there's existing residents. We've got some streets here, and there was a new garage that was built. And they ended up constructing an ADU above that, and this is detached. So kind of recessed into the hillside. I think the level of grade is somewhere around here. I guess the level of grade is somewhere right here. So it just enters via stairs up to the second level. Couple elevations. But really just, a modest ADU above a detached garage in that scenario. We have this one. This is in an area, an older neighborhood south of 6th Street. So there's an existing garage that they ended up off an alley here. They ended up converting a portion of this to an ADU. So there's a rough drawing, but there was still a garage bay that was left. And then some livable space, 526 square feet, so bathroom, some storage, and then they have the kitchenette and closet area around there, so small studio ADU. We have another one, existing garage. So a lot of these are existing garage conversions, and what they do is, a lot of these garages may be over 600 square feet in size, so they need to adjust them properly in order to maybe create another bay for the garage over here, but limit the space to under 600 square feet. So this is another one, again, Jefferson Street, so it's in, an older area, kind of the core of town. Alley loaded here to the west, and taking an existing garage, so we've got the 2 parking spaces for the existing house, and then they created one off the alley for the ADU. So you can see what they did here to keep it to 600 square feet. They just put a wall, and then they have this space as just storage space for either the ADU or the main house. But similar concept, master bedroom, bath. They do have a small water closet here, kitchenette, dining room, living room here.
So Mike, can you go back 2 of them? One more up. No, I'm sorry, the other way. Right there. So the parking, can it be on the road, or do you have to create a parking place in your property line?
It has to be off the
Off-street parking?
Yeah, it has to be off-street, so it has to be on private property.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what they've done here. We do allow parallel parking, and so they ended up creating a parallel parking space here, which satisfied that. But they did have 2 existing pull-in 90-degree parking spaces off of the alley. So notice this is an area of town that doesn't have any approaches from Jefferson Street. There are a lot of driveways that aren't in existence. Just a lot of them were just accessed off of the alley, and that was what they did. The traditional neighborhood development at the time. And it was old, I think, just a metal structure, and so they've gone and proposed to do some type of, shingle siding to dress it up a little bit, and so that was this ADU here that was converted. And there was another one. So this is up by Fire Station 3, kind of north of town. I couldn't track down the plans for this. I think we had larger hard copies, but essentially there was a basement in this, a walkout basement, and they just converted a portion of that to an ADU, and that was an example of, just kind of a mother-in-law ADU being converted to the basement of one of these newer homes. And this was another one. So this is a bit of an odd arrangement just because they have, so this is still by Fire Station 3, north of town in that area. We've got a garage here and that a long driveway, and then they've got this side access and another garage here, and there's a step down. So there's, the slab that would come here, but then there's an elevation change there. And so they were looking at getting rid of this area and this garage door with unneeded space, and so that's where that garage door was. And so they ended up just converting this area into an ADU. So previously, I think there's some stairs there. They have a bedroom. Got the kind of the kitchen area, kitchenette, small bathroom, and then some stairs that are going to lead up to the main garage level. So this brings us to kind of the main issue I think we've identified has just been the minimum lot size issue. And you really don't run into it in areas of town where you have new subdivisions because they're new and our existing zoning code reflects a lot of the lot sizes that are created. So if you create a new subdivision, you're required to meet the minimum lot size. And so we don't have any issues meeting minimum lot size pretty much for most of the properties east of Mountain View. But we do run into issues in the core of town, I think, where we've intended to promote ADUs because you have a lot of alley access and a lot of existing accessory structures that are accessed off of the alley, which, are pretty suitable for ADUs. And we have zoning districts that really go from one area of town to the other. So, this R2 zone here, so this is R2, 7,000 square foot minimum lot size, single family zone, is the same zone that we have east of Mountain View, but it's very different as far as just the neighborhood structure. And you have a lot of lots that don't meet the minimum lot size, as well as this is an R4 zone. The minimum lot size is 5,000. This is R3. It allows duplexes and twin homes and townhouses, and the minimum lot size is 6,000. So we found that, a lot of the ones that people have come and wanted to do an ADU and haven't been eligible for an ADU have been properties within this area and in the older areas of town, just because they were built maybe in the early 1900s, they were under a different zoning code, or there wasn't a zoning code at the time. And then we've just, throughout time, implemented zoning codes which have assigned them zoning districts, which may or may not reflect the, majority of the lot sizes within those zones. So I went through and just, based upon the minimum lot size of each zone, queried all the properties that don't meet the minimum lot size, and that's what I got.
Wow.
Wow.
Is it mostly a problem of width?
It's not a problem of width, it's because we allow them, even if we don't, even if they don't meet the minimum width,
But it's the square footage.
it's the square footage. And so that's really the excluding factor for a lot of these. And if you see, I'm sure that, if we looked at the subdivision plat, you look at all the ones around East City Park, those are all, I think, 6250, and they're required to be 7,000. So you look at all the red dots, and then you look at the zoning district, and it's this R2 zone, which, is probably meant to be more applied in the suburban kind of areas east of Mountain View. But we do have it here because the majority of the properties within this area, a lot of them are still single family. That's our least dense, or I guess our most dense single family zone is R2. It's 7,000. It jumps up to 9,600 for R1. So I think that that would probably be the thought process in the past, was to apply the R2 zone because it is majority single family and it is the most dense single family probably in town. But it did create this issue of we've got a lot of these non-conforming lots, which really doesn't give you an issue unless you're wanting to create an ADU, because if you have a non-conforming lot, you're in a single family zone, you can still build a single family dwelling even if it's vacant or if it burns down. So there's really no issue there. It just complicates matters if you want to construct an ADU because you don't meet the minimum lot size. Yeah, Rob.
Mike, would those lots have met minimum lot size at the time they were approved or that plat was approved?
I guess that's the presumption. I would assume that that would be a requirement that when they went through, but a lot of those properties were probably constructed in the 50s, late 40s, 50s.
What I'm leading up to is that when it doesn't meet a current minimum lot size, so you can't approve an ADU, but if it met the minimum lot size at the time that it was approved, couldn't you interpret that to say that it does meet minimum lot size and you could approve an ADU?
It's still non-conforming the way, no matter how you cut it.
But at one time it was conforming, correct?
Presumably, yeah.
That really predates the zoning ordinance, right? Is that correct?
It could have, yeah. Usually our first zoning ordinance, we had 1 and 42, I think was the first one, and really it was so bare bones that it just had residential and commercial areas and really didn't have much of anything. I think we started to get into more detailed ones in the 50s and 60s. And then the Local Land Use Planning Act came out at the late 70s, and we started to get, more detailed zoning codes. But I think it'd be hard to go back to be able to figure out on an individual basis whether or not these individual lots met the minimum lot size at the time. I think a lot of them, it'd be hard to make a determination.
I've always wondered, when you look at where most of the red is, most of it is west of Hay Street. And when you walk around the neighborhood, which is essentially Fort Russell, it's hard to know why some areas are R2 and some are R3 because they all look the same.
Yeah.
Essentially they're about the same density. And so that's always been curious, since probably most of those lots don't meet the minimum lot size for R2, but clearly they want to protect the single-family status. And,
Okay, two things.
yes,
So just because something was okay back when and is basically grandfathered doesn't, and there could be a lot of different things you're talking about, doesn't automatically mean we're gonna come in and say, go for it. You still have to follow some standards. The second thing is I'm wondering, if you, because a lot of these ADUs, they can be the basement, they could be the attic, part of the structure already. So you're not changing the footprint by putting an ADU in those cases versus, us adding on to the building itself. So I would think that just adding on to the footprint would be fine, as long as they're not building too high up and, all the other codes. But, comment?
Well, a lot of these lots, I think all of these lots that you see in here are 6,250, so 6,250 square feet. So they're a difference between 750 square feet of, being compliant with the minimum lot area, which isn't a whole lot. If you took two lots side by side and there's a 750 square foot difference, you'd probably be hard to tell that one was that much larger than the other.
would it make sense to limit the square footage of the ADU sort of proportionately? So if you're allowed 600 square feet on most lots, unless the house is really small, would it make sense to, whatever percentage the lot is of the required lot size, you'd apply that same percentage to the square footage allowed for the, does that make sense?
Yeah. That's an idea. Yeah. We limit it, it's kind of limited already just because of the 600 square feet or the 40% of the square footage of the house. So I guess presumably if you've got a small lot, you probably have a small house.
Right.
And then the square footage of the house is going to limit that. But we could certainly take a look at that if that was an idea. I just try to keep it as simple as possible
Right.
for people, to, as well as ourselves, to try to figure out. But yeah, the majority of the inquiries that we've gotten have been that the scenario where they have maybe a smaller home and then they have an older garage and they want to add, space either to that or somewhere within the dwelling. And it's just been in areas that it's made sense to promote, that attractive density, that we already have all the infrastructure and everything in place, and a lot of areas that are intermingled with multifamily as well. In R2 and R3 here, how they, like you said before, it's hard to tell, especially if you're walking up like maybe First Street. It all looks fairly similar. You wouldn't know that you're going across
Right.
different
No, you
zoning
don't.
districts.
No.
And you're going to have multifamily, and you're going to have duplexes, you're going to have single family, you're going to have mother-in-law apartments that predated, the ordinance. And so, I think it's in areas where you're already having that mixture of housing types and where it makes sense, but it's just been a, limiting factor there.
Have most of the requests been for sites that have alley access or not?
Most of them have, yeah.
There's a lot of alleys in that area, so,
They are, yeah.
yeah. Which
you
sort of
start-
mitigates the impact to a large degree, really.
It does, yeah, because you're able to use the alley for the access and everything. So I just wanted to review this and bring it to your attention and let you know that this has really been, kind of the only thing that we've thought of as we've been reviewing these. 8 in 4 years isn't by any means very many.
No.
We thought that at the time, if you recall those few years that we were going through this, we had some citizens that were pretty religious about coming and telling us their opinion, and a lot of them had the fears that this was going to create a duplex neighborhood out of their single family neighborhood, and I just don't, it really hasn't been the case.
It
with
really
with
does,
8.
with the square footage limitations, it doesn't make economic sense.
Yeah.
Unless somebody absolutely needs an ADU for a specific reason. In general, you can't get the rent that would offset the cost of building it in most cases, unless it's internal to the house and you're putting up some walls or something, but that was what I thought at the time, that is people would go forward if they really had a need, like a mother, an elderly person who needed to live on site, et cetera. So I think economics sort of determined it more than anything,
Yeah.
limits it more.
So I, just wanted to pose a couple questions about, what your thoughts are on just removing the requirement that they have, they meet the minimum lot size, and then any other issues you can think of?
Well, I don't know enough, but I don't feel automatically comfortable with just eliminating a minimum lot size. I don't know enough I know how well invested this was. I followed it very closely when I went through, and you went through it very, very much with a fine-tooth comb. Again, if it's an existing garage and you want to put a second story on it, fine. If it's in the house and you want to convert the basement into an ADU, fine, because you're not changing anything that affects the neighborhood. But I don't know
Well, it's
about.
almost on an individual basis, really.
So I'm wondering if, if there would be something like, here's all the rules that we have, and then there are some exceptions where we could consider it, like alley access, and where that might figure in. And if you're not changing your footprint, then that's probably going to be fine, as long as you're not going too many stories high, But that would still be subject to code anyway. So, just discussion.
I like it.
I love the ADU and how much work went into it, so I don't want to see it get messed up.
Well, I don't know what would be messing it up. All the restrictions are still in place. Everybody in your neighborhood's allowed one, but just because you don't have 250 square feet, then you're not allowed one. It's almost like an equity issue.
Well, what if you, instead of removing the minimum lot size, you just reduced it?
Well, that was what I was suggesting as, in some kind of ratio.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at lot coverage really, and trying to not maximize the lot coverage by putting an ADU on an ineligible lot. Instead, you just reduce the size that they're allowed from the 600 square feet to something less than that.
Mhm.
And if there's kind of an average, maybe we have a range of if the lot size is between 6,000 and 7,000 square feet or whatever it is, that they can build a 500 square foot ADU or something like that. I don't know. That's just a.
Throwing out.
Is that too complicated? Yeah.
Well, I just don't know what that would look like. We have all the zones have different lot size requirements.
true. And if we're carrying it across the zones.
So
that's
it would be, it's universal right now, so these are the requirements regardless of what zone you're in.
Right.
So we would have to, if it was to craft something where we, based upon the square footage that you're, short of, there'd have to be probably a percentage that we would have to subtract from the 600.
And it's only R2 that it's impacting, it sounds like. Or is that not true?
Well, it's all, yeah, that's probably the most amount of, the greatest amount of properties that are non-conforming, but, they're ones in R4, there's ones in R3, but, the greatest number are in this area, which is R2, but all these up here, R3, these are going to be, this is this area, so that's going to be R3, R4. All these properties over here are R3 in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Wendy?
Yeah. Sorry.
Mike, if you got a non-conforming lot, and somebody wants, it's either a house that somebody's gonna tear down or it's a vacant lot, when you build something new on that, as long as it meets setback requirements, there's no restriction on how big that can be, correct?
Correct. Yeah, as long as you meet setbacks and height restrictions, then it can be as large as.
So if you've got a non-conforming lot, I'm going back to your idea about taking the restriction of the lot size off, because, so they wanted to expand out beyond the original house. As long as they meet setback requirements, they're entitled to do that, right? They could build an add-on to the house as long as they met all those other requirements. So I guess I'm thinking that eliminating the lot size requirement is the easiest way to administer this thing. And, I mean, you don't have a restriction on how large a house can be as long as it in any lot, as long as it meets those setbacks, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So,
Just gonna take away a backyard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's another thing, do I remember correctly that there was a percentage of permeable space that had to be maintained so that you couldn't wind up with two buildings completely filling up the lot?
I don't think so.
No? Because that's what I don't like, is I don't want to see two buildings completely filling up the lot.
Well, you could get that now. I mean, you don't necessarily, it's just the ADU's just part of it. I mean, you could build garages that are that same size. It's just the ADU is the use.
Okay.
As long as you're inside the setbacks in every direction, you can build 100% coverage of the allowable area, so
Well,
that.
yeah, it was a
Yeah.
good point.
yeah, that's my point. And if part of what we're looking to do here is ease the restrictions and ease the management of that, that would be to me, it would be the simplest way to do it. Just take that off, and then you kind of have eliminated the problem for all those lots that you've identified up there.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, have you had sort of illegal apartments before we had the ADU ordinance come and sort of get legal with the ordinance? And
Yeah, we have. I won't-
I would think it would have
won't
that
point 'em out,
benefit.
but we do have a couple.
Yeah, I remember that discussion, that there are a number of illegal ones out there, and the hope was that once they were legalized, that they would come forward and.
Usually it gets caught when they go to sell it. I mean, that's when it comes to light, because, whether it's the home inspector, the appraiser, things have gotten tighter over the years, and so,
It was a canning kitchen, come on,
There was a what?
canning kitchen.
Hors d'oeuvre preparation.
Well, and I remember one of the other concerns was for fire safety. If you don't know that there's an illegal ADU or illegal apartment
Doesn't have
out
an
there.
address,
And then,
yeah.
yeah, there's no address, and the fire, and people come, and it could be a problem.
yeah.
So, that, and that's, you have to consider that.
Yeah, like Ann said, we get a lot of second address requests, usually from tenants that move in, and that's, usually what happens.
Okay, well,
Busted.
you may have alleviated my worry.
Well, it's just something to think about. I think we can bring it up next time, but I mean, we're really not proposing or thinking about doing away with any of the requirements here. It's just that you have a number of lots that aren't eligible for it, and, for whatever reason, they were, allowed. I mean, it's really a right that they don't have now, even though they may have been, platted perfectly legally at the time. And for whatever reason, the city, based upon the city's action of zoning them, now they're not eligible for a right that maybe everybody else in their area has. And it's just more, I mean, it's partly an equity, I think, an equity issue.
It's a small difference, and I really think ADUs are a great thing. So I'm not trying to stop ADUs.
I mean, if we had a proliferation and there was complaints rolling in, we had 50 of them in the last 4 or 5 years, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you, but
Well, you
since
may,
we've only
if it
had,
gets
yeah,
changed, you may get
maybe
that
going
many.
in the opposite direction, but we just haven't we haven't seen it. I mean, I think they've been popular for some people, but I mean, it was just like, if you recall the survey that we sent out to gauge the perception of people, it came back extremely positive as far as, would you be all right with allowing them in your neighborhood? And it was really high. But when they were asked the question about, would you, think
it was
about
low.
doing one in the next 5 to 10 years, it was pretty low.
Yeah.
So I think it just reflects, really what the survey that we sent out,
Right.
the results that came back. I mean, I think that that's what you're seeing, is that nobody really has an issue with them, but not everybody's going to run out and create one as soon as it was passed, and that's pretty much what we've seen. So,
Other comments or questions, anybody? So we'll revisit it next time.
yeah, why don't you
and
think about it, and we can bring it up next time, and then if you're comfortable, we can move forward. If not, we don't have to.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Item number 7, subdivision code review.
So we've been working on the cluster and traditional subdivision option for a few months, and I did attach to your packet is the complete subdivision code. I just wanted to start, I'm not going to bore you and go back through every little detail of the whole thing, but just wanted to, kind of go back and refresh your memory about what we talked about. If we need to, go back through that again, we can. But a lot of that, I think we've discussed and vetted, but there are certain sections like access points, we had talked about at previous meetings, and, maybe we go back through those items again. But I do have I think last time we ended up, and I don't think, Wendy, you were here, so we ended up talking about kind of a structure of where we're going to put the traditional subdivision option and the cluster subdivision option. And we originally thought it was going to be located in the subdivision code, which was going to be moved into the zoning code. But we started, looking at the subdivision code and thought that it would be probably a better section to put it in. Let's see. Right, the bulk and placement regulation. So, the whole issue is just really the tables that we're creating that are similar to the bulk and regulations tables that we currently have in the code. And so we wanted to locate them really in the same place. And we thought it made sense to add them into Chapter 4 of the zoning code and kind of keep them separate. And so we've gone through this last meeting, but really this is the structure of Chapter 4. It's got the introduction, it's got our table, it's got exceptions to height regulations, it's got explanations about how to measure setbacks and all the little intricacies of measuring setbacks, and then we have this access to lots and buildings. And we were thinking at the same time that it'd be nice to incorporate some of these items into table format, and so that's what we were proposing here. So this is the bulk and placement regulations table, and we've got, minimum lot area requirements, minimum lot width, the setbacks, and then we've got exceptions to the minimum setbacks. It's just a summary statement about height regulations. So if you have a chimney, cupola, antenna, water tank, solar panel, those don't have to meet height requirements. Those can protrude above the maximum height. Setbacks just kind of goes through what we talked about before, definitions, how you measure them, where you can project into required setbacks. There's some exceptions, alternate ways to measure setbacks, and then measurements for setbacks for flag lots as well. And then we've got this section about access to lots and buildings, and so we just thought it was better to kind of relocate a couple items within there and then convert it to table format. And so that's what we had done. in Chapter 4, and this is actually relocated to Chapter 1, so we've got non-conforming lots of record. So this is really what we were just talking about. So, you know, if you're in a zoning district where single-family dwellings are permitted, or in existence at the date of adoption of this zoning code, a single-family dwelling is still be able to be erected on that lot. And so that just, you know, just to get back to what we were just talking about, the minimum lot size. But it seemed prudent to put this section underneath that section, and so that's what we did. This is the requirement that every lot abut a public street right-of-way has to meet frontage requirements so long as sufficient permanent legal access is available via the right-of-way access or other legal means. So we were just relocating that. It's still the same language, and then we've got the minimum lot frontage. We would just thought we'd put this in table format, and so it made sense to take it out of narrative format and just put it here. And then incorporate a few of those items. So this was the paragraph about the height exceedance for the, you know, chimney, solar panels, etc. Just putting that underneath. We already have a footer that's for building height where that's defined in the code. We would just be adding that to that. You don't need a different section for the, you know, the exceptions to the building height. And then a couple of the other items for the access. So we define, you know, you can't exceed 150 feet for flagpole lots, can't be less than 20 feet in width. We'd add that to as a footnote. But we do allow access. So this is the, you know, our last code amendment for more rural lots. We allow them via permanent access easement, no less than 20 feet, and they can be greater than 150 feet so long as they meet fire department access requirements. So just really moving these into a footnote instead of a section of the code where they could get lost. And so you'll be able to reference those. And so that's where, you know, these footnotes are referenced in this area, and it's primarily for flag lots. So just redoing the structure there, and then we'd have traditional subdivision option after that. So we talked about last time, I think Joel made the comment that traditional maybe should be in front of cluster, and so we made that change. And so after the bulk and dimensional table, then you'd go into the traditional subdivision option section. And so this is new since last time, so we can kind of go over that. We've got the purpose statement that this section is intended to allow for a subdivision development option that encourages a traditional neighborhood development pattern, which is characterized by smaller lot sizes, a mixture of housing types, neighborhood open space, and a gridded street system with alleys that is pedestrian oriented. Then the application, this is similar to our cluster subdivision application, really just saying that, you know, this is optional. Allows for alternative to conventional subdivision development. Those traditional subdivisions have to follow the same process that's outlined in our code, and then this section supersedes the minimum lot area with setbacks and maximum building height requirements found within the previous table, which is just in the previous, you know, the prior section of this chapter. And then all other city standards should apply. Then we get into the common open space, and really this is structured the same as the cluster, only there's a section at the end where we talk about it has to be for preservation of natural area, you know, agricultural land, floodplains, wetlands, steep slope, wildlife habitat, riparian area, and other natural features. So that's really not the intent of a traditional subdivision, is to conserve those features. So the remainder of it we've left. So the language about Parks and Rec Commission making a recommendation to City Council we've left. Looking at the suitability of the land proposed to be dedicated, and then kind of directing them to, you know, the following standards, and then, you know, still having those standards but eliminating that last one on there. So that's largely the same. And then we've got traditional subdivision development standards. So, you know, when you think about a traditional subdivision, it's kind of the items that we listed here. Mainly a gridded street system with alley access at the rear. So we wanted to go through streets, you know, saying traditional subdivisions shall utilize a network of streets and alleys that form an interconnected grid pattern. cul-de-sacs or other dead-end street configurations shall only be allowed in limited situations where the street cannot be continued or extended due to extreme topography, existing development, or natural or man-made physical barrier that precludes such street extension. So, that's more of a safety relief valve. If there are those circumstances where it does make sense, that would certainly give the commission and council some direction to deviate from that a little bit. And then going through lots, so building lots shall be designed for vehicular access to the rear of the lots via alley access to allow the front building wall of dwellings to be located closer to the street in order to reinforce traditional neighborhood design and maintain a pedestrian-oriented environment. Alleys shall serve all building lots unless special circumstances exist which preclude access, I'm missing a word there, to such alley extension. And then we've got the bulk and dimensional standards. So, I think that in our minds, that's really what defines a traditional subdivision, is really the gridded street network and the rear access, pushing the dwellings, the structures up towards the street to create that, building wall and the interaction of the street, and having it be, more pedestrian centric instead of automobile centric. And so, that's really our first look at that, the wording of the traditional subdivision section. But any thoughts on that? Then we've got the standard, this is what we had reviewed before. I think I still need to change the just the building height there. I did notice that. That was one
So
thing.
would tree canopies still be, street trees still be required in?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think that's another
Yeah.
important component.
Yeah, the street tree program would still apply, and, it would be under our current program, so.
That's good.
And then the cluster, I think this is about the same as we reviewed last time. I just still need to change the building height there, but everything else, I believe, is the same as what we reviewed last time, so. Hopefully we're nearing the end on those sections. I think we've got those pretty well vetted, taken care of, so. Any other thoughts about any of that?
And will you still look at graphics to illustrate these concepts or not? Yeah, you had started to do that in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I can't, yeah, I can.
Oh, I know,
Certainly.
yeah, I was just wondering
Yeah.
if it would be part of the
Yeah.
plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, any comments?
So there's one more item that we had talked about last time, and Wendy, I don't think you were here, but we had talked about, expanding this. So we had single-family detached, and we wanted to expand that to other types of single-family attached. And so we added twin home and townhouses. So right now, we don't have it in these zones that don't allow it. And I know Rob made the comment that he'd still like us to take a look at that, and so we're still kind of researching that, and I'll bring you some information in the future. But the idea at the time was that we can expand it to single-family attached in these two versions. We'd reduce the lot size down to really what we allow now in those zones. But really just allow the range of housing types, not just single-family detached. But, internally, I don't think we really wanted to extend that into zones that don't currently allow those.
Right.
And we were trying to figure out the legality of doing that as well. So that's where we stand on that. But we did expand that to cluster as well as traditional. So added, twin home townhouse there for lot area and lot width. And so those were changed since last time. And then the main subdivision section, my plan was to go back through that.
So,
But I wasn't gonna do it tonight. I mean, it was gonna be to take a look at it, and, if there's sections, wanted to rely on you to look at sections that you wanted to go over. I mean, we don't need to go over the monumentation section, because a lot of that's straightforward. If maybe take a look at it for a couple weeks, and then come back and let me know which sections we want to go back over and go through in more detail, so we're not going through all the nitty-gritty plat requirements and things like that we don't necessarily need to go through again, so.
so you want to defer that then to a.
Yeah,
future
unless,
meeting?
well, we could certainly talk about some of those items now, or if you can't think of any right now, we'll just bring that up next time, or how about in the next week, maybe send me an email, and then I can include that in the presentation next week, and we can go through, in greater detail some of those sections that you may want clarification on or may want to talk about. I know next meeting we have couple public hearings, so we will have some time at the end.
Out of curiosity or something, a friend and I drove around and looked at Temple Commons and Green Acres and some of them that Wendy had suggested, and parts of town I don't ever see, which is really interesting to me. We went through some little area, I think it was called the Cottages or something, and she brought up the point of having only one access into a small area, which is something we had quite a
I was
bit of
just looking at
discussion
the
about.
access points.
Yeah, we had a
That's
lot of
what I
discussion about
flagged
that.
If I'm reading this.
And this is not someone on the commission, this is
Right.
someone who was making a comment on that.
It seems like 30 dwellings is a lot to only have one access point.
Well, I think before we had
She thought-
60, right?
Yeah,
And
okay,
that's
so
what we
this is
talked,
that-
yeah, I mean, that's what we talked
Okay.
about.
Yep.
And I think I have it, I've got that whole discussion somewhere here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I remember, it was 60, and we
Right,
dropped
right,
it down
okay,
to
yeah,
30.
Yeah, so this is it. So this is,
So you cut it by 50%, really. Okay.
what happened? Here we go. Yeah, so we had this section, yeah, so it was
Oh, I
it was
yeah.
previously 60.
Right, right, okay.
And we talked about that and ended up cutting it down to 30. But, I think we reviewed, yeah, so, this was the, the examples that we had. Peterson second, which is yet to be constructed. I think it was platted in 2012, but they just haven't moved forward with it. You've got 64 single-family dwellings, 30 two-family dwellings, and 16 multifamily dwellings.
Only one access.
You've got one access, but we did require a second access to Sunset Drive here. So, obviously, these streets will continue at some point in time. But, this is all U of I property up here, so that's the dairy. And so, it's not guaranteed that those will continue up there. And so, if this subdivision gets developed, presumably we'd have this main point of access. But that was actually a condition on the plat that they put in that second access to Sunset Drive, because we don't have it anywhere in the code. But it was, that's what we're faced with a lot of these, is that because we don't have it in the code, it's more of a recommendation from staff that they have to add a second access. And so that's why it's nice to, have these things codified. But, that was one example where the original subdivision design didn't include this second, emergency access point to Sunset. And this was the Green Acres. We have 43, here. We've really only got one point of access to 43 homes. So, if it was 30, they wouldn't meet that now. We have 36 here, and that's Greensides up on North Polk. Smaller.
Well, it makes the
PUD.
neighborhoods like their own entity and they don't connect to one another.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, you're dealing with some topography here. This subdivision was constructed, a lot earlier than this one has been. And so you have this one that ended into a field, and there's a kind of a drop off there, but there was a requirement here that they add this private access drive. And there was already this connection here that really just serves as fire department access. I think there's bollards on either end, but that was part of the, requirement of that plat, that they add this access in case something happens here where it's blocked off. So in reality, they do have 2 access points on this one. It's just that one of them is fire department access.
Will you go back to the, what is it, Peterson, the first one?
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's over 100, so now it would need 3 access points. Oh, 120.
120 is what, well,
Man,
I don't
I'd
know if
like
we
to
reduce that or not.
Yeah, it's close. I'd like to see 3 access points on that one. So the multifamily unit,
We reduced that to 100, so, yeah, right now, we have less than 30 is 1 access, and then 30 to 100 is 2 access points. And then more than 100 is no less than 3 access
okay,
points.
and that one tops out
But,
at over
yeah,
100.
I mean, we still have the section below it that talks about, that safety valve, the number can be reduced. Maybe there's a scenario where it's adequate to reduce it. The city engineer obviously wants to take a look at that, and council would ultimately approve access, but we wanted to give them direction, as long as it's adequate to ensure city emergency services and provide safe and efficient traffic circulation. So, this is not, these aren't set in stone. There's still allowance for a deviation from some of these, but.
And tangential to this is, what about, you look at these really long blocks for school kids, et cetera, or people who just want to walk and be able, the connectivity, like, there's no sort of mid-block connectivity for pedestrians. Like you look at Pintail Lane there and Mallard Court, it would be nice to have something that cut through that big block. Where are we going with pedestrian right-of-ways and pedestrian connectivity when, a 660-foot long block is really long, and that's in the subdivision code somewhere.
Yeah.
That's long.
Yeah.
That's like, Portland would have 3 blocks in that space,
Yeah.
and some of our traditional neighborhoods would have 2 anyway.
Yeah. Just
And-
depends.
yeah.
Salt Lake, you would have.
You'd walk a mile before you'd find.
walk a mile before it'd be a block.
But it's monotonous to
Yeah.
walk in Salt Lake.
Yeah.
No offense, but
So on page 11, we have pedestrian walkways. So previously, this wasn't included in our subdivision code. So if you flip to that.
right, I highlighted that because I wanted to ask you about
Yeah,
it.
so that's where we have, so pedestrian walkway should generally be required where the pedestrian walkway would reduce the average travel distance of pedestrians by more than 50%, or were otherwise required by council to mitigate potential safety hazards. So that's, that's really been what we've relied on in the past, is that if the walking distance is so much, longer for pedestrians than it is for people driving a vehicle, and it's usually when subdivisions, it's parks. So if there's a park property, and whereas a vehicle can drive and you've got to go to the same route as the vehicle, but it takes 15 minutes to walk, whereas it takes 2 minutes to drive, then you start to look for those pedestrian connections through
yeah.
blocks. And so that's a way to try to mitigate the pedestrian walkways, issue that comes up. But yeah, but we have a lot of those issues, and a lot of this is driven by topography. We probably, if this was perfectly flat land, I'm sure they wouldn't set up lots that have these cul-de-sacs and are this deep, because that's really just wasted space, but it just drops off. That's why they have the yard, the grassed area, and then all this property down here, because that's all just hillside. And so it gets challenging. I know, like in Itani and Panorama area, Fairview by Good Sam, you have those stairways to, I mean, it seems like heaven. They're stairways to, they go on forever. But that's what they were meant to do, is just connect, always reminds me of like Glacier going to the Sun Road. I mean, it's like you're walking from Fairview all the way up to Panorama, and it's a long walk. I think a lot of people use them for exercise.
It's like the switchbacks, yeah.
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 Why can't pedestrian walkways count towards the parkland?
Oh, yeah, it would be nice, yeah, a green thoroughfare, or green, whatever, or that's the wrong term. But whatever
Might
you said,
encourage
sounds like a good idea.
Might encourage the developers to put those in if,
Yeah.
there was something in it for them other than cost.
Yeah.
Because there's not much north-south movement opportunity for pedestrians on that lot.
We got a flood.
Yeah, and that's just
Shouldn't
been,
go too far.
I mean, we have our linear pathways through town, and I know those are, a lot of those are counted, like Paradise Path, obviously counted as park. But yeah, just the pedestrian pathways, probably a conversation for Dwight and the Parks and Rec Department, whether or not.
A great example is from Cleveland to Sixth. By Shorts Chapel, there's a little pathway
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah,
connects Cleveland to Sixth Street.
yeah. By the Nazarene there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use that
Oh,
one.
yeah, I use that one, I used to run on that all the time.
I go through
Yeah, I
there.
know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So then we, had looked at fire code requirements, and in the fire code, we looked at a bunch of other jurisdictions, and a lot of them had the 30 for the threshold for 2 access points. And so we looked at the fire code, and actually the fire code requires, if the dwelling units exceed 30, then they have to provide 2 separate fire department access roads. So, it's kind of bringing it in line to be consistent with the fire code as well. And so that's one we talked about and changed, so.
That's good, yeah.
And then, it goes on, so multifamily, projects having more than 100 dwelling units should be equipped throughout with 2 separate and approved fire apparatus access roads, having more than 200. 2 separate. A lot of those just, access roads. I mean, you get to these large parking lots, and those are declared access roads, the travel aisles to the parking lots, and so that's what that refers to. So yeah, if you recall, we went through kind of these other jurisdictions. A lot of them had the 30 as the threshold for 2. Some just required 2 regardless. I mean, there was no threshold. But, yeah. Any other questions on that?
I'm good.
I think you covered most of mine, so
Okay.
I'll look through it real quick. Anybody else? So we'll revisit it next time, I guess,
Sure,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, like I said,
or.
go through and
getting
take a
ready-
look at it, and if there's something that, you want to talk about, let me know, and
Okay.
I can do more research, or we can have a discussion on it, whatever you want to do.
All right, so are we going on to item 7? At this point, okay. So for continuing education, I received an article from Nils Peterson about density, basically about resistance to density, that sort of is in line with some of our discussion on subdivisions. And I was traveling and I had just my phone and I failed to forward it to everybody, so it didn't get posted. But it's a topic that if that's of interest, I think I forwarded it to
Yeah,
you when I got back.
yeah, and Mike sent it out earlier today
Yeah, we
as
got
well.
Oh, you got it, okay. And maybe we can try to ferret out another article or a presentation or something that goes with it, that surrounds that topic. It's a pretty short article. It, probably would generate 10 minutes worth of discussion, and maybe that's all we want, If we have a packed agenda for the next couple of meetings, I don't know where we are with that, but.
Well, I was just thinking that we were talking about doing the subdivision again next meeting, and you mentioned we've got 2 public hearings. Wendy won't be here.
I won't be here.
Maybe
I'll
we should
wait till
push
July.
that till July,
12th?
the
Is it 10th
first
or
July meeting,
10th?
along with discussion of the article. That
Perfect.
way you could participate with.
That'd be great, yeah, if that's okay, yeah. Okay, we'll do that. And, let's see, so item 8, Transportation Commission meeting report. Joel, do you have anything to?
The Transportation Commission will meet in this room between 4 and 6 tomorrow,
Okay.
and I'm going to miss it. I have to go attend to my 102-year-old mother who's decided she's
102?
she's
Oh, my goodness.
she's about to the end of it.
Aw, wow, that's pretty impressive. So, do you know what the topics are?
I have not found the agenda. The agenda is on the city
Right.
website, but
Okay.
I can't read it on my device.
Yeah, they're fun for that.
You want me to tell you, Wendy?
Sure, that would be great, yeah.
They're gonna be talking about the Gotcha Bike Share Hub locations.
Okay.
The university is proposing a variance to the right-of-way on 7th Street. ITD. I guess somebody from ITD is gonna be there to talk about, I don't know what it is, do you put changes in front of the bank?
I think they're just going to discuss requirements. So there's a Idaho Central Credit Union project on 3rd Street, the one that they've been excavating for,
Yeah.
seems years. They're going to talk about Idaho transportation requirements as far as what kicks in traffic impact studies and what kicks in turn lanes and things like that. And so I think it's more of just an educational session for the Transportation Commission to learn about ITD's process on a lot of the new development that occurs within city limits. So they're going to, I think, be talking about that.
Okay.
The university item, they're trying to beautify that portion of 7th Street, and it's that portion of 7th Street that's just a small section. I think it connects to Elm.
Trying to figure
But
out
it's essentially goes into the backside of the, I think, Student Union building.
Oh, okay.
And so they're trying to make that more of a gateway into the building. And so it's more of just a beautification project on that street. They want to highlight that as being a prominent entrance to the building, whereas right now it looks like it's just an entrance to you have to go across an alley, and it just looks like a service entrance, and they want to promote that as being more of a pedestrian major access to the building.
Huh.
So.
Okay.
I might mention that, speaking of transportation, the new transportation chair, is it?
Michael Kite? Yeah.
Made a really nice presentation before council, was a couple meetings ago, was
yeah.
it? And the video would be out posted. It'd really be worth looking at, because he talks a lot about goals and where they're heading with it. So for purposes of self-education, I thought it was a worthwhile presentation.
Last Monday.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Anything else? All right, adjourned.
Great. Thank you.